Hi, welcome. And it is Monday here. It's July 23rd, and it's great to be with you today as we continue moving through Isaiah. And as I mentioned last time, we got to chapter 36, which kind of ended the first part of Isaiah, which really had to do with prophecies of judgment. We've now completed through chapter 36, 7, 8, and 9. The recounting of Isaiah's experiences and conversations with Hezekiah. And now in chapter 40 we move on to now where God through Isaiah is going to address for us what is to come. Here's God's plan unfolding. Here is what he's going to do. This is now where he begins to lay out, which we now know clearly, but at that time lay out this process of redemption and restoration. And so as we continue in chapters 40 to 44, we now get a picture of what is to happen here. Now, think of it, as we start chapter 40, we're really getting a vision about 100 years down the road from where we were with King Hezekiah. By now, the people have been languishing in exile in Babylon and have despaired of ever being able to go back home. And this message in Isaiah is really geared towards them, and he speaks to them. And whereas initially we've always, so far in the Old Testament, really focused on God as the creator, now we're going to see God and his redemptive work begin to come to fore. And so as we look at this, let's pay close attention as we read through these chapters for that promise coming true. Now, of course, we understand when it comes to God's grace, as we move forward here, from the perspective of the children of Israel, in a historical sense, what they could understand through these chapters is that promise of deliverance, the promise of being able to return to Judah, ultimately, and the promise ultimately of restoring Jerusalem back to its former self, and even better yet. Now, in a spiritual sense, we can think of it much the same way, just with some adjustments. It really speaks to, and we understand this because we see it in Isaiah, we respond to it, we read it in the New Testament as it refers back to Isaiah. The captives are set free. God will forgive their sins, and God will bless them with his presence, his fullness, his power, his spirit. And so it's a little different way to understand it, but we can't do that until, we better not get ahead of ourselves, until we get the whole picture of God's redemptive work through his Son, Jesus Christ, which is coming in Isaiah and then further on after that. And we will get to that. I loved what one commentator said as I was reading it. He said, if the Old Testament is about sinful man seeking God, and that's kind of the picture that we've seen in the Old Testament, is man falling into sin and spending the rest of the time seeking God. Sometimes Yahweh, many times other gods, but always needing to seek out God. If that's the case in the Old Testament, then we make this shift. And here in Isaiah right now, chapter 40, this is a great place to make that shift. It also transitions when we get to the New Testament. But now the New Testament is about God seeking sinful humanity. So whereas in the Old Testament God says, I've created you, I've sustained you, I've set up my rules and regulations, I've made you a people, the people, children of Israel, and now you are to follow me. And the rest of the time it's about the children of Israel either seeking God in one way, shape, or form, or turning away from him and seeking after other gods. And that's kind of what the Old Testament has been about, and we've seen that play out now. The New Testament, though, transitions to God now taking the next step to complete this whole cycle of his redemptive plan, and that is to seek out mankind and draw them close to him through the redemptive work of his Son, and restore them ultimately into fullness and full relationship with him. And so Isaiah now makes this transition and this subtle shift. Chapter 41 spoke about the character of God. Chapter 42, now we get into this message of the coming Messiah. He will set things right in chapter 42. He will do two things, actually. He will set things right, and he is also going to teach God's laws to the Gentiles. So now we get this, it's not just about the children of Israel, but we're now getting this picture. It's about the Gentiles, too. It's about all mankind. So we now begin to piece together, okay, so there's more to it than God just creating, setting things up, and setting mankind on his way, and wanting them to love him. Now we're going to move forward with more of God's plan of salvation. But if we recall, and now we're going to get ahead of ourselves again, in the Old Testament, as you recall, that process of reconciliation was all and restoration was about the shedding of blood. Now, if you were really sharp, and Isaiah begins talking here, you could begin to say, oh, how will that play out here if blood needs to be shed? Down the road, it becomes clearer that ultimately blood will be shed, but in this case it will be the very blood of God himself shed on the cross on our behalf. Chapter 43, God creates and shapes man into the children of Israel, a body of people. Now he's going to move to complete that process by redeeming and then ultimately restoring. So now we get this whole salvation process that we are in the midst of, and Isaiah is going to flesh this out over the coming chapters. Now I want to leave you with one final thing today. And what I really like about this, because it does relate to our pastor's sermon this weekend about Psalm 23, because it really displays the character of God. God says, you are mine. In other words, I put my name on you, you are my child. Well, as we know, being a part of a family means you go through the good times and the bad times together. And God displays that for us in the midst of it, saying, I will not reject you. Though you are sinful, though you are struggling, I go with you. And so God gives us this wonderful picture of what a truly good father, mother, or family member is all about. And that is, we're together through thick and thin. And that's what God promises here. He will be together, and he will see us through our sin, and by his grace he will redeem us and bring us back to himself and restore us ultimately to that beautiful picture of the new heaven and the new earth that we will see one day. So I really take great comfort in that, and there's a lesson for us as fathers and mothers as well, that when we commit to being parents, when we have children, there's a responsibility more so than just providing for them, but rather it's to be family. It's to raise them. That's what family's all about. You spend time, you agonize with them, you celebrate with them, you go through the good times and the bad times, you see them through. That's hard work. But nonetheless, God gives us that wonderful example of how he sees us through and provides for us. And that's a good lesson for us to take today. So with those things in mind, let's continue reading through Isaiah and continue to watch him unfold this prophecy of revelation and restoration. God's blessings to you this day.